Hello and welcome to News Take. My name is David Chavern. I'm President and CEO of the News Media Alliance. News Take conversations are designed to be wide-ranging and look at topics from across the news and magazine industries, but it's also helpful to go narrow sometimes. And today we're going to be talking about some ground-level issues in local news in Memphis, but with Eric Barnes, CEO of the Daily Memphian, but also exploring what it's like running digital businesses these days. The Daily Memphian is an online daily news source in Memphis that launched in September 2018. And for 10 years, Eric has hosted Behind the Headlines on the Memphis's PBS station, a weekly news show focused on local government, business, and the community. Since 2019, he has also hosted The Sidebar, a podcast on the Daily Memphian and radio show on local radio station WYXR that focuses on arts, culture, and everything in between. Eric is also publisher of a group of community newspapers in Tennessee and former president and current board member of the Tennessee Press Association. He is currently president of the American Court and Commercial Newspapers and on the board of the Local Media Association. If that's not enough, he's also a novelist and published short story writer, and has a Master of Fine Arts from Columbia University and a bachelor's from Connecticut College. Eric, what a background. Welcome to the show. First of all, we have to start with, talk me through this journey. You're first a published novelist. Yeah, it must be the first published novelist we've ever had on the show, at least that I know of. Tell me about how these career paths came together and how you ended up where you are.
So it all made sense in the moment. I mean, I went to college at Connecticut College. You mentioned that. And all I really wanted to do was be a writer. And I got out of college with a lot of student loans. And, the reality that, writing fiction doesn't necessarily pay the bills. And so I got a job at the Old Saybrook Pictorial Gazette, a little community newspaper in Old Saybrook. I covered Deep River and Chester. And went from there. I continued to write and went back to school, went to grad school, got my MFA, got a lot more debt. And so continued to need a job. And, it was just always a balancing act of writing and parenting then came in and being in publishing on the business side, on the tech side, on the very editorial side. And so I still kind of circle through all those things. And it somehow makes sense in the moment.
Fantastic. So give us a little background on the Daily Memphian. One of the interesting things about the news business now, right, is in the digital future of the news business, is we're always looking for new entrants into the space, right? Where there's legacy publishers who I represent a lot of those, but I also represent a number of digital only outlets. And at the end of the day, a lot of the challenges are the same as we look into this, the future of this business is digital. So tell us about how you conceived of the Daily Memphian and how you conceive of it as we'll talk more about the online strategy and the pluses and minuses there, but tell us how it came into being.
So we launched, like you said, and we just had our 4-year anniversary. That was preceded by a year of frantic, nonstop, behind the scenes planning and trying to figure out whether we could really do this. And I had been, like you said, in publishing here, local publishing. I've been in Memphis over 25 years now, and one way or another had been involved in publishing here. And we were Memphis, like a lot of cities, I mean, our local paper was retracting and it was really cutting. And I mean, the business is obviously incredibly difficult. And so Memphis has an amazing group of really civic minded people, and whether they're wealthy or they're really engaged, but just, there's a lot of very cool things that go on here. And one of those folks was a friend of mine, my neighbor and friend for 25 years. And I'd done a lot of work with his dad and with his wife, but I never really worked with Andy. But Andy Cates came to me and just said, "Hey, I'm really worried about, as a city, if the trajectory of our local paper continues, what does that mean, right? It's not good for a city of our size. And could we do something?" And so we spent, off and on years talking about what we could do, and the cuts kept happening in our paper. And so we finally just, we were able, very much he was able to kind of pull together a group of people who wanted to invest in a truly local online, news site. We did a couple things that were weird. We wanted to do a print edition, even maybe a weekly edition.
Yeah.
It just didn't economically make sense. And then the other thing is we wanted to be a for-profit, but economically we couldn't make it make sense given what we wanted to do. It's not that I don't think there are for-profit models that work at local news, but for us to have a very big mission, we do everything from food to politics to neighborhoods to high school sports to arts and culture, business, more than I'm forgetting, off the cuff here. And so we decided, it was hard to look at people and say, hey, you really should invest. And we raised about $6.5–7 million to launch. This is where you should invest $7 million with me. Like, this is a great idea. Don't invest in real estate. Don't invest in the market. Don't invest in all these other tech startup. Invest in local news. What we could, though, say is this is an incredible civic investment, and it's really important. And that's how we got started. But we also said, I've never run a nonprofit. I've been on lots of nonprofit boards, and Andy hasn't run a nonprofit either, although he's been very involved in nonprofits. We want to run it like a business. So we knew we didn't want to be, we wanted to be subscription first. We wanted to charge a real rate. We wanted to sell advertising, have whatever kind of ancillary services and events we could do. And the fundraising would be sort of a philanthropic venture capital model. The fundraising would fill the gaps and still fills the gaps as we build more earned revenue. And that's still how we run things. There's a lot of people who don't know we're a nonprofit. We talk about that more and more now as we've gotten a bit older, but we really kind of downplayed it at first for a variety of reasons I could talk about. But that's the long-winded origin story.
Yeah, so interesting. I've got a number of publishers in my membership who are owned by billionaires, by the way. And there's sort of an easy assumption that, oh, you have a billionaire owner. That's cool. Like, there's an infinite amount of money.
Yeah.
And really a common frame for a lot of these owners, it's not exclusive, but a lot of them is, I'm going to buy this thing and let you run it. And, the subsidy they're providing intellectually is they're not asking for a current return, right? All the other investments in the world send them a check at the end of the year. This one, you don't need to, but also they don't like to write more checks, right? They don't, going to them and to fund losses turns out to be not super popular. But in a similar way, like, you really need to think of these things as a mix of revenue, because if it's just one single source, philanthropic sources, first of all, there's vulnerabilities attached to that, but also
huge. Yes.
Yeah. People could be not interested one year, but also you want to be able to convey to funders that you're being responsible, like you're running as good a business as you can. And here's the part they can play. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's totally true. I mean, I think, we looked at a lot of nonprofit news orgs around the country, most of them very small, obviously Texas Tribune being the big one at that time. And most of them were, free news, maybe some ads, but more kind of more sort of, donor ads, and then a lot of fundraising. And we just looked at it and said, that's not sustainable for us. We're not based in Austin, a capital city with a big high tech culture. I love Memphis. This is an amazing city, but, for us to be purely nonprofit would be, it'd be very difficult, as generous as this city is, but also be a bit of a drain on other nonprofits, and my philosophy was people paid for local news for decades, if not a century. We had 15-year fever dream where we thought we could give it all away for free, local and national. And nationals at the time we were cooking this up were really waking up to, we got to get serious. New York Times had made its big shift and was proving that out. Others were making their shift to charging for subscriptions. And we said, we're going to charge. And that way we're not a burden on the nonprofit community. We're not constantly shilling for more money. And that was the appropriate way to do it. And the interesting thing was that locally, the donors and the foundations here who supported us really supported that. They didn't want us to be purely nonprofit.
Yeah.
What is interesting in the industry is there's a real schism. I mean, there's the American Journalism Project, people who We are very, very friendly with one another, and they do not approve of our model because we charge for local news.
Yeah.
We don't approve of their model because we think, you can't rebuild local news on the backs of pure philanthropy. A lot of times when I talk to people about being a nonprofit local news site, they're like, oh, okay, you're you do politics, you do opinion, you do a thing, you do a niche. And there's nothing wrong with that, but we wanted this broad-based mission. So we've got a newsroom approaching 40 people. I mean, I was out at the Texas Tribune a couple months ago and got to meet with, Evan Smith and some other folks. And I think their newsroom's about 40 people, right?
Right.
But they've got a $10 million budget, virtually all of that philanthropically, 80% of it something philanthropically driven. You can't do that in Memphis. And I don't think there are very many cities you can do that, where you could support an appropriate sized newsroom with a broad-based mission that's pure philanthropy. And it's and you look around the country, it's really not happening. I mean, the Texas Tribune is amazing in terms of the work they've done, but it's the exception, not the rule.
So let's talk a little bit about revenue. How do you, and tell me whatever you're comfortable telling me or not telling me, how do you think about your revenue mix? What's that look like, and where's it come from?
We always wanted to be, subscription first. You could see what was happening. I mean, all my good ideas I stole from the New York Times. We could see that people were paying and they were cracking the code on that. We could see that the Wall Street Journal, which never really took its paywall down, was continuing to do well. You could just see where things were going nationally, and there weren't very many local sites that had committed really to hard paywalls. There were exceptions, but not in general. So we knew we wanted to do that. We knew we wanted to charge a fair but meaningful rate, not do heavy discounting. And then we knew we wanted to sell advertising and sponsorships, but we didn't want to go down the ad network route. Yeah. And I'll explain why in a second. So one nice thing about being a nonprofit, it sort of all becomes public. So I can tell you in very round numbers how we'll finish this year. We'll have expenses of about $5 million. We'll have about 2.3 million in subscription revenue, about $1.1 million in, advertising sponsorships, another $250,000 plus in services. So what I got to about, 3.7 or something like that. Mm-hmm. And 3.5 somewhere in there. And then the gap will fundraise, right? We've already fundraised. Some of it long-term commitments and then new commitments we got this year and so on and so forth. And then next year we want to squeeze that gap down to more like, $750,000, the magic of recurring revenue on subscriptions and some modest price increasing and so on, increases and, more in advertising and so on. The newsroom, the expenses will grow some. That's just the way it is. So around 40 in the newsroom is about where we want to stop. And then there's another, 12 to 15 in the business side. And then, probably 20 freelancers on the, that support the newsroom. So that revenue mix was, let's charge a meaningful rate. We chickened out and we launched at $7 a month. We should have launched at $9. We waited a year. We took it to $9. We're now at, about $13 a year or $13 a month or $109 a year. We'll do, obviously there's a discount if you pay annually and maybe we're too in the weeds, we'll do some 20% offers and stuff, but we don't do $1 a month discounting. I think that's not to pick on anybody. I think that's the bane of our industry. And I think it's a real, it's not good. Everybody, most people who are honest will say that doesn't work. You lose so many people when you're doing that heavy discounting. Maybe it works at scale. I don't know, but it would not work for us. So, and then the other thing was on the ad side, because we wanted to be subscription first, we didn't want to use ad networks. Because when you get into so many of the ad networks, you're feeding the beast of traffic. Absolutely. And you're making editorial decisions that feed that beast that we didn't want to make. And you're putting things on your site that are slowing down your site. And I get it. I'm not like, that one, I don't fault publishers for doing it. I get it. We're all trying to, pay the bills and support the enterprise, whether it's nonprofit, for-profit, whatever. But we didn't want to go down that road. So we sell all our advertising sponsorships. 99% of it is local. We have, we have 3 ad reps and an ad manager sold primarily to local businesses from mom and pops to FedEx, which is headquartered here.
Oh yeah. Great.
First Horizon Bank and AutoZone and so on. All big companies here in Memphis. And, we also made the decision, and I'll shut up, was Memphis a very crowded event city.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people, doing a lot of events and I think across local news, I think particularly I hear it a lot in the nonprofit space of, oh, you just need events. You just need events. Memphis is crowded for events. So we have a really effective American City Business Journal that's here that does really good events. Our legacy paper does good events. Our Alt Weekly, which is locally owned, and City Magazine, are just all these organizations doing events. So we carved out some events, some food events, some business seminars. We don't do rankings and top whatevers, top 40, top 40 and all that. Not there's anything wrong with it. It's just too crowded. And also events you need an event staff, right? You sort of go, oh, we made so much money on this event. We also spent so much money on this event.
Yeah. It's expensive strategy. It definitely is.
Yeah. So that's the business model.
And obviously it also has its own sets of volatilities. Listen, all revenue streams have some volatility attached. Really, the goal is to have a mix so you minimize correlated volatilities about your about the revenue. Yeah, it's really interesting on the so tell us a little bit about your ad units. So you said they're local, and is it and certainly people are moving away from programmatic generally. I mean, a lot of people have some piece of it, but it's also not anybody's strategy at this point. It was 10 years ago, but it's that's not anybody's strategy because you're not going to be net really winners in that. You may participate because you have to. But tell us a little bit about your ad units. It's straight up display? Is there any kind of interactive components? Are you developing? How do you think about your ad products?
We're probably, honestly, a little bit behind. We're probably not as creative. We really have spent, there's only so much time in the day and the week and the year, and probably we focus a lot on the paywall and the subscription strategies and the retention strategies and pricing and the funnel of getting people to follow us, getting to read, hitting the meter. All that stuff we spend immense amount of time. So our ad, units and ad buy, when we launched, this is kind of like quasi embarrassing. We launched, everything was flat rate. It was what you paid per month, because partly we didn't have any traffic. So we were like, we really had to just kind of lean on people and say, we think we'll be about here. And honestly, a lot of the small local businesses sort of preferred buying I'm committing to $500 a month.
Yeah.
Not, I know what I'm going to get for that. I'm going to be on every email of this type. And we still sell. So we modified that, but we still sell a third of our advertising is flat rate. And that's mostly small businesses that just kind of like I want to be on the arts and culture newsletter every month. I know what I'm going to get. I don't have to think about impressions and my price going up and down. We don't do video ads. We don't do really hardly any video, actually. It's just even editorially, maybe when, if there's a surveillance footage that kind of goes with something, we'll certainly embed some Instagram stuff, that kind of thing, but we don't do hardly any of our own video. We don't do big takeovers because we're reader first. So we really minimize how much of the intrusive the ads are. We only just introduced this year sponsored content. So, branded content. Yep. That was intentionally, we wanted to wait a couple of years on that because we wanted to make sure we had credibility, right? If you're the New York Times, you can introduce, or Wall Street Journal or whoever, you can introduce sponsored content and you might get some complaints, but there's real confidence of the integrity of the editorial relative to the sponsored content.
Right.
We're brand new. People are getting used to us. They were getting used to our fonts and our choices, so how to distinguish sponsored content from a regular article we just didn't want to go there. So we think there's a big opportunity with sponsored content and local advertisers getting more and more into that. And that's a big push, especially going into next year. But in terms of interactive stuff, we are behind. There's more we could do without hurting the reader experience.
Yeah, so interesting. So you do, in terms of, you don't do much video, you said, but you do podcasts. I guess you host on, or are you getting into that business? There's a real kind of at some level format convergence, right? You have people doing journalism, essentially creating your original IP, and then it's how do you express that? People are used to expressing it through text, and that's the core thing. But are there other? I think a lot of publishers are wrestling with, we've spent we've created this expensive content. What are other ways we can express it and engage with new audiences? But again, all of the other video, certainly, I mean, podcasts, most certainly, video, the monetization still is wrestling, particularly video is expensive, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was telling that the New York Times, I mean, I was at a thing and Meredith, I can't pronounce her last name, but the CEO there talked about how they pulled back pretty dramatically because it wasn't monetizing, and they did some amazing video. I mean, really like PBS level, frontline level video. And obviously they still do some, but it's hard to monetize. It's a lot more work than you think. It's kind of like, oh, you can do a podcast on your phone, right? And it's like, no, I mean, you can, but not really. You can do a crappy one. I mean, so there's some of this stuff is, and even on podcasts, for instance, we do about 4 podcasts, really. We probably had 8 or 9. We actually pulled back a bit. We were just a little too like, why everybody's doing a podcast? I look around the newsroom and everybody's doing a podcast, like, come on, let's go do some stories. But what we have found is the partnerships with local media have helped. Like you mentioned, I'd done the show on our local PBS affiliate for, it's actually now 13 years. And that was really, it isn't the biggest station in town, but the reach in terms of local news consumers, I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. And so continuing that and enhancing that, where we provide news clips and other stuff to their morning broadcast. And then another public radio, that you mentioned, this WYXR, which is mostly a music station, but a public media station here. We do a lot of news with them. Next year, whatever year that is, 2023, we'll launch a little morning 5 to 8 minute, morning audio only news, kind of, news in brief. We might do it in the afternoon actually, but anyway, that's details. So it's a balancing act, because you do, I mean, I'm like anybody, it's like, ooh, candy. I want to follow the candy. And, candy gives me a headache. I mean, I'm old. So I think, again, we did too many events in our first year. We really curtailed. We launched with too many podcasts. We kind of trimmed those. We pursued some more media partnerships where you've got built-in audience. You're tapping into the local PBS audience or this local music station. We do a little bit with local commercial television that does pretty well for us. So it's kind of a balancing act. I mean,
Yeah, people with the other formats, people always underplay the discipline and technology related. Meaning, like if you're doing video, the lighting should be good, right?
Yeah.
You should have a good microphone. You should, all this stuff that,
I mean, everyone who thinks I'm on my phone, I'm not. I mean, it's just,
Yeah, exactly. Well, good. So tell us, in terms of what sort of has surprised you in this journey? Probably a lot, but what are some of the surprising challenges? What's been harder than you expected, or maybe what's been easier?
Easier was early adoption of subscriptions. So our first year goal for subscriptions, which was a modest goal, but it was like 4,500. And we had a lot of people in the industry say, you'll never get there. You're a startup. People don't want to pay for news. You've got a competitor, blah, blah, blah. We hit 4,500 in 3 weeks. We hit 7,500 in the first 3 months. So that was awesome. We were brilliant, right? But I mean, we're at, what is it now? Right around 18,000. So you can see, I mean, we got these early adopters, and then now it's, it's a fist fight, like anybody doing subscriptions. I mean, you're a fist fight of churn and net new and all that kind of stuff. We're still growing, but it's harder. I joke, but we screwed up on price. We chickened out, cause we started, what was it? $7 a month. We should have been more expensive. We underestimated that in going into our second year. We really underestimated how hard it gets to be smart with a paywall. You really, little things, testing colors, testing price, testing. For our first year, we had one offer. You paid us annual, period. Then we're like, well, some people want to pay monthly. Some, you can use a decoy offer as a 2-year to push people into the annual. We got a lot smarter about that, about social. We were, one thing we were super dumb about, we had a terrible social media strategy, which in our first year and a half, which is embarrassing because we were a digital publication. We were just sort of like set up a social media automated poster and like, oh, we got social media. We're posting all day long. We got this. And we look up and we got like, 12 followers. So I mean, we were dumb about a lot of stuff. We were smart about email. We had heard and talked to a lot of people who were saying, "Hey, email's not dead. In fact, the opposite. It's an
Yeah.
incredible driver of traffic, engagement, advertising." And so now we have probably 125,000 unique emails across 30 different email newsletters of daily, weekly, ad hoc, and so on. Hiring, was we were kind of spoiled at first because we hired a lot of veterans who were game to leave their current gigs, many from the legacy paper, but from all over town. But some of them have retired or they've moved on into marketing, and then we're hiring. It's just hiring. Even pre-COVID, we're hiring a lot of kids out of college, which is great. I was a kid out of college who didn't know what a school bond was, or I didn't know anything when I was covering Deep River, Connecticut. So you realize you got to work, you got to talk, you got to hire kids if you're going to grow, and that takes a lot of work, and not in a bad way, but it just does take a lot of work. So
by the way, I should have asked this before, but in terms of your content verticals, obviously, local politics, local current events. What do you do outside in terms of more lifestyle content? I mean, do you do sports? Do you do arts and entertainment? I mean,
we do a lot of sports. University of Memphis basketball. We do prep sports. We do a lot of Memphis Grizzlies basketball. So it's probably it is really our biggest department. It's sports, metro, business. And then we don't do enough arts and culture and arts and entertainment. I mean, we've gotten better and better. I hear from readers every day, they want more, but it doesn't convert. I mean, this is the sad reality of analytics and, everything we know now, right? I mean, that the things we thought were great aren't always as great, but in terms of the business, right? But we do more and more arts and culture, and we've kind of found our niche with that. There's also a fair amount of arts and culture coverage in Memphis, so it's kind of, again, crowded market. We again, like down to neighborhoods. But what we've really learned, honestly, is the thing that has become clear in the last year is what really converts, because that's what it's about for us, right? Is engaging and converting and so on, is enterprise, is deep looks at things. And that can be things as simple as the 30-year history of a shopping center. It sounds like nothing, but in local news, it was kind of like, oh, it's 30 years. And why is that shopping center? And like lots of shopping centers, how come it has always thrived? Every day economic downturn. It was a deep look, a lot of history on it, did really well. We did an investigative piece that brought down a really sleazy superintendent, that did really well. So anything deep, anything a little bit deeper is really important. And then you got to balance that against what I think was dismissively called commodity news for a while, like the city council vote last night. I mean, you got to do the city council vote last night. I mean, it isn't most read. It isn't most engaged. It doesn't convert a lot, but part of our journalistic mission is to be that paper of record for some of these things. And so it's this balancing act. How do you do the city council vote, then pick out an item where you go deep a week later, and that's the thing you make subscriber only, and you convert and people share it, and it isn't most read, but it's most engaged and most converting.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I remember a number of years ago, I had a great discussion with a good friend and I think one of the great publishers in the United States, Mike Clansmith from Minneapolis Star Tribune. And
they I've never met, but they do amazing stuff.
And Mike is just super thoughtful. Also a former magazine guy, interestingly. But, there's this thesis for a long time about just continually go narrow, right? It just pick some narrow niche, be it local politics or something, and just drill that out. And, the internet is its own buffet, and that people will go find the other stuff. And what he told me was when it's talking about people's community where you live, it turns out people want a buffet because they interact with their community in a lot of different ways. They want to know something about local politics, but also what events are happening, what happened with the game. And, you've got things like, the Washington Post has this amazing vertical on weather, Capitol Weather Gang, where they drive all this obsessive attention about weather. Or I think Arizona Republic has one just on, buildings going up or coming down, like what's going on. And it turns out people, people aren't really narrow about their communities. They're kind of
They
broad
are.
based, and you kind of want to, if you're about the community, you got to be about
Yeah.
where they want to be, right?
I think that's 100% true, and obviously it shows with the Star Tribune. I mean, they weathered the storm as well, or arguably better than anyone. And I think some of that stuff about that, you can find it somewhere else. Commodity news comes from, I think, at the national level. That's very true, right? I mean, there are a plethora of really great options for national news and international news. We can all use more, and everyone has flaws, but right. I mean, you can pick and choose from all these options. And I do, as a consumer of national news. I read WAPO, Washington Post, New York Times every day. Whatever else I see, I might be somewhere else. But in Memphis, that's not, I mean, we're actually probably better off than many cities our size, because we do have a legacy paper that, while not as big as it used to be, still has some really great journalists here locally. And we're in a newspaper head-to-head competition with them. We have a really good ACBJ business journal. We have this locally owned, all weekly. We've got a, other kind of niche presence. We're better off than a lot of places, but still, if we didn't cover high school sports, it would just be on Facebook. Right.
Yeah.
And a little bit in our legacy paper. And there's just a lot of stuff. If we didn't cover it, you'd find some Facebook posts opining on the vote the city council took, but you wouldn't necessarily have, I mean, local TV news isn't doing here was the vote tally and here's who voted out, I mean, so I think some of that is when the national thinkers apply their perspective to local. I mean, and I mean really local, like
local,
right. So
so interesting. So I guess you're also in charge of a group of community newspapers. Tell me about what that is, how it relates, and how it's similar, and how it's different.
It's confusing. I had started working at a small publisher, a longtime family-owned little paper here 20 years ago in December. Comes out of the legal notice tradition, court and commercial legal papers. So I became publisher there, and I ended up, I mean, the long story short is we then launched a number of other papers, or bought some papers around the state, and I had equity. I mean, it all comes down to money, right? I mean, I had an equity interest in those. And so when Daily Memphian was launching, my friend and co-founder and board chair, Andy Cates, I mentioned, we were kind of like, all right, how are we going to reconcile this? And I said, all right, well, I'll again, it's all public in the 990s. I'll take a reduced salary and keep, a percentage of my time on this other group of papers. And the board got comfortable with that. It's weird. I mean, but it was just about that. You can't have equity in a nonprofit. You shouldn't be able to. And that I had worked really a long time to build that. So, and we partner a little bit on some stuff in Memphis, not in the other parts of the state, but the Daily Memphian supplies content to the Memphis-based community paper, so I don't have a distraction over there.
So are these weeklies? Are these like free weeklies?
They're free weeklies around the state, and in Memphis, it's a 4-day-a-week paid U.S. Postal Service paper. So
interesting. And so it's sort of a piece of legacy business while you're building a digital business. I mean, how do you compare and contrast a little bit, or how's the community newspapers been doing?
They've been doing really well. I mean, and I'm still on the board of the Tennessee Press Association, and the community papers are not. They haven't seen the kind of catastrophic cuts that have happened in other local news. I mean, they just haven't. They're still very connected to their communities. They may not be the kind of journalism that shows up in the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal, but they're important to those communities. I mean, the ribbon cutting for the new, whatever is really important in small towns. And Tennessee's been pretty good about that, almost surprisingly so compared to many other places. We haven't seen the loss of as many newspapers and as many journalists at the truly local level that beyond the cities. The cities have been decimated, but the newspapers have. So still people, it matters to people. It reinforces that. I think essentially, really more than anything through my work with the Press Association, you just are reminded of how much this matters to people at that local kind of level. On the Daily Memphian level, it's been an eye-opening experience because I had been in smaller scale with smaller scale publishers, I'd been on TV for 13 years, so people kind of recognize me. But when we Daily Memphian, I mean, I go to the grocery store, I go to a restaurant, people have opinions. I mean, they, you know, I mean, some of them love what we do. Some of them are mad. Some of them, you know, there's a couple places my girlfriend will not go. She's like, we're not going to that restaurant anymore.
Well, at least they're paying attention.
Yeah. At least they're paying attention. And it's, you know, it's not the other thing you have to do. And it's not about me. It's about what we do, right? It's about all of that. And people will recognize me, but it's about whether it's a story an intern wrote or it was a story that one of our veterans wrote. It's what Daily Memphian did. And again, we're a big, small town. And I like that in the end, even when they're mad at us and they'll be mad at me, I want to hear that feedback and I want it to be real. We want to be connected to Memphis in that way. And I think I learned that from a lot of these community papers and these community paper publishers. You have to be in and of and part of your community to be successful editorially. And then from there, be successful as a business.
Yeah, I get it. You know, I'm from Pittsburgh originally, but I've living down in the Washington, D.C. area for almost 30 years. And there's a little town in Washington suburbs, Falls Church, Virginia, that I've spent most of my time living in or near. And there's a community newspaper, Falls Church News Press, that, you know, we're in a big metropolis, but that thing sustains that community, right? And it's an incredibly important role. So let's, you know, first of all, you've been great. You're super generous with your time and advice. So as a kind of closing question, again, we like new entrants in the space and we like new entrants to be successful. So, and there is this moment of certainly barriers to entry to, you know, getting online and trying to do journalism online or lower, even though the barriers to revenue are still super significant. If somebody's out there wanting to start, you know, local media business wherever they live, you know, what advice would you give them? Uh-oh. Talk to you offline first. Probably.
Yeah, no, you know, be very realistic about it. Right. And because it's super hard. It's incredibly hard. I mean, people value this, but you know, do they really want to pay for it? And it's just hard. It's hard to hire. It's a difficult business. I think the other thing I say to people, and I do get calls from a lot of people, I mean, from the Baltimore Banner to the, you know, tiny little things that haven't launched yet, but you know, I'm always happy to talk to people because I love people who want to try to get into this, whether it's by and large, it's people looking at nonprofits and locally now that have reached out to me because it's just such a tough business. But the other thing I'll say to people is, you know, make sure you know what your mission is and not your profound mission, but just your business mission that, you know, if you're here to cover this kind of news, what's that going to take and how are you going to support it? And I do my thing like I did early in this conversation about if you're going to be pure philanthropy, I think you got to really know what you're doing and you got to be really realistic about that. People are not, you're going to get some early adopters who love local news, who've told you should do this. And then you're going to be up against news consumers who are used to free news, have some other sources, have social media sources. And it is dollar by dollar, whether that's a subscription or that's a donation. And it's hard. And so I'm always like, you know, is your mission to do this niche thing? And that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. Right. How are you going to pay for it? What's that niche going to be? And how are you going to pay for it? And that's the thing that I think that is most difficult, most frustrating, not with the individuals, but with the industry, particularly in the nonprofit side, is people calling up without a business plan. You know, people, longtime journalists who are frustrated, who maybe got laid off, who have a following, who are like, I'm going to just launch this and I got a couple people who want to pay me some money. And I'm like, that's not a business plan. You know, it's just not. And again, you don't have to do what we did necessarily with a hard paywall and a pretty relatively high price. You also don't have to have 40 people in your newsroom, like know what you want to do, but you got to have a business plan. And I do think, you know, I worry that, like I said, that some of these groups out there that are funding local news are not really funding sustainable business plans. So.
Excellent. Eric, thank you so much. This is a great conversation. I really can't thank
thanks
you
for
enough.
having me.
And I want to thank everybody for watching. And if you just want to listen, you can also follow us and listen to past and future episodes of News Take on Spotify, Apple, or Google Podcasts. Again, Eric, thanks a lot.
Yep.
Take
Thank
care.
you.